Well, hello everyone. This is the first video on this channel. This is a channel that I have created in intentions to talk about literature and things of the sorts, ranging from like specific author videos to specific works where we talk about like one specific book, one specific work, a short story, a collection of short stories, any of the above, any of the following, about some of my favorite authors, some of the things I've learned while studying literature, some of the things that I'm interested in. But before any of that, I wanted to introduce a bookshelf collection so that you kind of get a sense of me and what I'm interested in, what I'm focused on in the field of literary studies. I'm a senior at the University of Arizona. I am an undergraduate literature student. This is my last semester coming up here in about 2 weeks, and I got a few books for Christmas, and I've already had quite a few books that have ranged from like things that I've been interested in over the past few years of literary studies. But first, I want to introduce you to like what I'm more closely thinking about as of right now, as of entering into graduate school applications and whatnot. First things first, the first thing I would say everyone should have in their literature collection is the Holy Bible. If you are interested in the Holy Bible and its relation to literature, I would suggest reading Job, Ecclesiastes, and Jonah. And then I would obviously read the Gospels, and I would probably read a little bit more of the Old Testament. You could read Song of Songs. Anything written by Solomon is probably a good thing to read. Some of my favorite authors have been influenced by Job and Ecclesiastes, such as Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Ecclesiastes has a really big presence in the world of literature because of its sort of pessimist philosophy, coinciding with American studies and American literature. But I would definitely say that the Bible is a must-have in your literature collection. Even if you are not religious, it is well worth your time to read. If you have any wanting to understand, the abridgment of books from ancient times to now, you have to have an understanding of the authors inspired by the Bible. And I have a lot of authors in this collection that are inspired by the Bible. So, Bible, absolutely must have it. Then I have this. This is more miscellaneous, but it does go back to what I'm thinking about. It's called Philosophies Men Live By. My dad gave it to me. It's a book that his mentor had in his library, and what it has in it is the Sophists and Socrates, and then it has hedonism with Epicurus, and Schopenhauer with pessimism. So that's the pursuit of pleasure. Then it has section 2 is the life of reason with the Stoics, Spinoza, and Lippmann. And then we have the urge of progress with Nietzsche, James, and Dewey. The compulsion of the ideal is the fourth section with Plato, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant. And that's all the 4 sections. For me specifically, I spent a lot of time thinking about Immanuel Kant for my interest. His theories of certain things, the way he kind of adapts the sublime into his own reading is sort of fascinating to read. I do also think Schopenhauer is worth your time. But yeah, mostly the moral imperative from Immanuel Kant is pretty important to the shaping of literature and the shaping of the last 200 years. Obviously, it's a big piece of influence to Herman Melville, to Edgar Allan Poe, to pretty much all American writers of the last, popular American writers of the last 200 years. I spent a lot of time thinking about 19th century American literature in regards to these sort of philosophical theories and the Bible, sort of the terror that kind of lies in these works, Moby Dick and Poe, super terrifying stuff. But yeah, so this one, I haven't read all of it, but I really like the Kant section. And Kant's probably my favorite philosopher next to Kierkegaard, Yeah, probably Kierkegaard. And then Hegel, probably, yeah. Then I have my collection of my favorite author. That is, I don't know if you can see it. That is the Greatest Works by Edgar Allan Poe. This has pretty much everything. It opens with his most famous quote from the Philosophy of Composition, of bereavement. But this has pretty much everything you could want out of an edition of Poe. It has all the poems, including Alone and the Bells. Typically, collections stop at Annabel Lee, which I consider his best poem, next to The Raven. But good to know that it has Alone. Alone is the poem he wrote at 20 years old, sort of autobiographical. And it is short, and it's really quite interesting when you read about Poe, when you think about his philosophy. I think that's kind of an integral piece to everything. But from the poem section, I would recommend Tamerlane, To Helen, The Raven, Ulalume, A Dream Within a Dream, Annabel Lee, The Bells, and Alone. For tales, I would probably recommend all of them. But if you want specifically my favorite, I would go with The Fall of the House of Usher, The Black Cat, The Oval Portrait, and if I had to pick one more, it's probably Ligeia. This doesn't have Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, but it has pretty much everything else. For the essays and criticism, I would pretty much read Philosophy of Furniture, Review of Twice Told Tales, Philosophy of Composition, and The Poetic Principle. The Philosophy of Composition is a really fascinating essay where he talks about like what brought him to constructing The Raven, how he constructed it, and how like every single word matters. Poe is someone that I think about super deeply in the sense of like terror and rationality and what his narrators are like moving through in a world that I think Poe mostly finds pretty nihilistic. The letter section is cool. I mean, I've never really thought much about Poe's letters. There's a few in there that like give in insight into what he might have been thinking about the world, but for the most part, the letters are hit or miss. But everything about Poe is pretty fascinating. Of course, the back has a quote from Annabel Lee. It's, "She was a child and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee." Annabel Lee is really what I would say his most beautiful work of bereavement. It's actually more widely debated whether this was about his wife Virginia. It comes out about it's published posthumously after his death, but Virginia dies about a year before he does, and Annabel Lee comes out in the last year of his life. And some scholars have speculated that it is about Annabel, that it is about Virginia, but others have speculated that it is about a childhood love. Obviously, as you know, this quote says, "She was a child and I was a child." You know, there's definitely some dispute whether Poe wrote this about someone else. The letters to Annie and the poem to Annie would suggest that Poe had more than one person that he held in a light of love. But I think for the sake of the ultimate bereavement that Poe sort of thought about his entire life, Annabel Lee kind of is the passing of his own life and his own, horrified feeling of life and love. It's sort of a really sad poem. Annabel Lee is dead. It's a story of, he says the angels came from heaven, and then the wind came chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. And what you'll find in Poe is that mostly everything is sad, even in his philosophical stuff. Now there are arguments, and I read a book by G.R. Thompson called Irony in Poe this semester. Very well worth your time if you ever get a hold of it. He talks about, he's most inspired by Edward Davidson's reading of Poe, and Edward Davidson did a complete, sort of full sail analysis of Poe's works. Very worthwhile. A Critical Study is what it's called by Edward Davidson is definitely worth reading. And then I would suggest G.R. Thompson's Irony in Poe. And G.R. Thompson suggests that everything in Poe is sort of ironic, and that Poe believes the world to be like a hoax, in which God has inflicted upon all of his subjects, and sort of that the world is like made up of these irrational objects, but that not actually that they're not actually irrational, but that the formal makeup of the world is what's irrational, and sort of brings about a sense of impending doom, the ominous feeling that Poe kind of felt throughout his life. So I plan on making a full video where I talk about each work in this book. Maybe not all of them, because there's a lot, and there's some that just like don't even really like matter if you really want to talk about like I don't know if I can say a lot about like Fairyland. I don't know if I ever really thought of Fairyland. Maybe there's more into it. I have to read it more in depth, but definitely like stuff like The Raven. That sort of manifestation of terror from the narrator is something that I think is worthwhile talking about. So this is a new pickup. This is a Christmas pickup. I mean, I absolutely adore Poe. I think he's probably the great 19th century American writer, right next to Herman Melville. Though I will be honest, I don't quite love Arthur Gordon Pym, but I can see its influence in H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. So I talked about that in class one time. I have a second edition, Essential Tales and Poems. It's pretty big. That is because this one actually does have Arthur Gordon Pym. That is the only other addition to this. I don't think there's anything that this has that the other one doesn't have besides Arthur Gordon Pym. But it does have like some endnotes and some other like things that you should read. Hold on, let me see if I can find it, because this one mentions Edward Davidson in it. Edward Davidson is kind of a pretty popular writer when it comes to thinking about further reading. It says right here, if I can find it, I'm pretty sure it mentioned him in this list of further reading. Davidson, Edward Poe, A Critical Study, Harvard University Press, 1957. Yeah, definitely worth your time of reading. I haven't read any of these other ones. Hopefully I will get around to them. I haven't even read Harold Bloom's Edgar Allan Poe study. So, got a lot more of studying of Poe to do. But I think if you're really interested in kind of getting into Poe, a great starting point is probably Edward Davidson's Critical Study. So what do I have next? I have two books here. The only two books that I have from these authors. So I have, let me set this one down. I have To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This is a sort of in the same vein of James Joyce, Stream of Consciousness novel. I don't really know much more about it. I don't have a lot to say about this, but Virginia Woolf, obviously one of the great novelists of the 20th century in that same modernist vein. And I'm really looking forward to reading this one here in the next few, weeks. Then we have Ernest Hemingway, the only Hemingway I have, one that I have once read, but I did not, this was a long time ago, one that I didn't fully get everything out of, but that is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. It's the one that I have remembered most fondly of all of his works, besides his short stories. I'd super recommend the Snows of Kilimanjaro. I know it's not a super popular one, but this is obviously a reference to Ecclesiastes, the passage in Ecclesiastes where the sun also rises. And this is about war and sort of autobiographical. Ernest Hemingway was kind of is kind of a sad author to read, knowing about his end, but his books are so full of life and love and thinking about things. So definitely excited to reread The Sun Also Rises. And then I have two books. I don't have The Great Gatsby in this shelf, but I have The Beautiful and the Damned, and I have This Side of Paradise, the two F. Scott Fitzgerald novels that a lot of people know but don't really read, because The Great Gatsby is The Great Gatsby. Don't get twisted. Great Gatsby is a great book, great novel. I actually haven't read these, but I bought them because I wanted to read them. I've read The Great Gatsby 3 times. I think it's very good. It's not one of my favorites of all time, but I do think it is one of the most fascinating novels in the canon of American literature. But I wanted to read these other ones. I've heard that they are, just as good, if not better, than The Great Gatsby. But that depends on who you're talking to when that question is asked. But yeah, I'm gonna go grab some water. So I'm excited to dig into those. Don't have a lot to say about them. I haven't really thought that much about early 20th century American literature. There's a few books that I'm really interested in studying and thinking about, but right now, S. Scott Fitzgerald isn't like one of those guys. So the last book that I got for Christmas, last of this first little section, is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I would say next to Moby Dick, this is probably the great novel. It is fascinating. Also, a little bit funny. That sounds crazy to say, but Nabokov is sort of musing a little bit of dark humor in this novel. You have to sort of closely read it, but there are some really quite funny moments, black humor that comes from Humbert Humbert. But if you, what interests me most about this novel is the Poe references, but specifically at the beginning when Humbert Humbert relates his inability to move on from children he attributes it to a woman he knew when he was younger named Annabel Lee. Obviously, we just talked about the poem Annabel Lee. Yes, this is the same thing, pretty much. The story that Humbert Humbert tells is the story of Annabel Lee. It's a little bit different. There's she dies from disease, which is speculated, of course, in Poe's work, but isn't as explicitly stated as it is in this one. He says that a disease took her from him, and that was sort of a moment of unconsummated love, childhood love specifically, that stuck his mind in the past. It's sort of his rationale for what he does. Psychologically, super interesting piece from the book. Now, whether you take that seriously or not is completely up to you. Humbert Humbert is of course probably the most unreliable narrator in all of literature. He flatters himself to an absurd degree. And so that's one of the things people point out about this book is that he talks in such a way that it's sort of hard to hate him. One thing I will say is I'm not really typically crazy about the covers of Lolita, and I'm specifically not crazy about this Vanity Fair quote where it's like the only convincing love story of our century. I think that's sort of a misreading of the book, and these like sort of seductive like covers of Lolita are sort of missing the point. And obviously, Lolita is a child. This is not supposed to be a seductive book or a seductive piece whatsoever, no matter how much Humbert Humbert tries to convince us that it is. It's not a love story. I don't like that Vanity Fair calls it the only convincing love story of our century. I would say that's complete crap. Like that is, if you read this book and you really think about it, you really want to think about this deeply, that is not what you should get out of it. And considering this is sort of, even with the humor, this is still a little bit autobiographical for Nabokov. Yeah, I mean, read it. I would try and probably stay away from there. There's another one with like a girl as the cover that I find sort of like, again, I get what they're going for, but I do feel like sort of Lolita has sort of been stigmatized in our culture to be something that it's not, and that's like romantic. So as much as you want to believe what Humbert Humbert is saying is like some sort of like fascinating romance, it's really not. And it's more so his ability to lie and feel like he's more intelligent than he actually is. So we have a next shelf. I have my Oxford World Classics editions, which I got for Christmas last year, a lot of them for Christmas last year. I have 12 of these. I have Mary Shelley's more neglected novel, that is The Last Man. This is not one I have read. I am a huge fan of Frankenstein, as you will see shortly here. But this is the sort of like one novel of Mary Shelley that people were reading during COVID. Um, it's a pandemic novel in the sense it's about the last man. Um, I really do like this cover though. The mountains and stuff. The scene in the mountains with Frankenstein is one of the great moments of the sublime in literature. If you know what that is, sublime. The sort of feeling you get when you witness nature being like larger than yourself. It brings about a certain feeling. But I haven't read this one. I do want to read it. I really liked Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So this is another area of interest for me. The first book in this sort of line of study. It's The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. This is considered the first Gothic novel. It is from 1764, about 100 years before the Poe Gothic stories. This is pretty crazy. I mean, also considering Frankenstein is considered like one of the first like great Gothic novels comes out, 50 years later. Anne Radcliffe also was around this time. Yeah, this is a short story. I have not actually read it. I've been meaning to get around to it for a while. Very short, 100 pages. Yeah, and this is really quite an influential text. I've thought about it, sort of a lot when I'm thinking about the Gothic, the modern Gothic more so than anything else. I took an American Gothic class this semester with my favorite professor, and sort of thought about Horace Walpole a little bit, but the modern Gothic is really quite fascinating. So yeah, that's Castle of Otranto. Then we have my only Oxford Shakespeare. I have other Shakespeare, but I don't actually quite like the editions of the Folger ones that much. Macbeth is one of my favorite things I've ever read in my life, and I don't know if it does it quite enough justice, but this is King Lear. King Lear is one that some people sort of think is like in his big three, and I understand it. I like King Lear. I did a presentation on it 2 years ago for class. I think it's a really interesting work about mental health, and it's sort of an inverse of certain things, but it is textually, in terms of like lyric and the sort of music of the poetry of it, not my favorite. And that's not to say like it's not good. Obviously, it's Shakespeare. It's amazing. But I have not thought about this one as much as I thought about other Shakespeare like Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet. So yeah, I mean I like it. I don't have anything bad to say about it. It's more so that I thought to get more out of it than what I did. I have a short one here. This is Sigmund Freud, A Case of Hysteria. Freud, pretty unpopular, pretty integral to literature studies. I do not read him as like an is-all be-all, but I do find his work sort of fascinating in the realm of psychoanalysis. I thought about it a lot when I was reading Milton, and sort of paralleling Milton's writing to modern day, authors such as Foucault and Freud and Jacques Lacan. I think his essays on the uncanny are probably the most integral piece worth reading. I got this because I wanted to know what this was about. It's a short book, super cheap. And I was mildly interested in it, and it was good for my curiosity. So yeah, I think Freud is an interesting figure. I know he's sort of become unpopular, disillusioned in like the realm of literature, but I do think some of the things he talks about are like well worth your time if you're curious about psychology and stuff. Another thing I have is called William Paley. This is Natural Theology. This is sort of the anti-Darwin, and it comes before Darwin, so it actually influenced Darwin. It was greatly influenced by this book's structure and style. It says this on the back of the book. This is essentially, as it says, the anti-Darwin. This is basically him saying the natural world proves theology is true from its own creations and whatnot. And I haven't actually read it, but yeah, William Paley sets out to prove the existence of God from the evidence of the beauty and order of the natural world. Biology, anatomy, and astronomy in order to demonstrate the intricacy and ingenuity of design. So yeah, I've been interested in reading this for a while. I really like the cover. Oxford World Classics, what they do have is fantastic covers. But yeah, I've been interested in reading this. For curiosity's sake, I think this is a really fascinating novel. I think about theology a lot for the sake of reading, the Bible and reading the Bible in comparison in the world of American literature, sort of how influential the Bible is to these texts. And, I'm trying to understand whether the terror in American literature is based from like this Puritan line of thinking, or if it comes from like a different realm of secularism that we like can see but like don't fully understand. That's kind of my interest in this type of theological work. But yeah, this is one that I'm interested in diving into in the future. Then we have Matthew Lewis's great Gothic novel, The Monk. One that's been sitting on my shelf for a while. I have not read it. It's 1796, so it is also before Frankenstein. This is one of the first Gothic novels ever. Yeah. This is one that I've been interested in reading. I'm hearing it's pretty crazy. My professor told me that it's pretty wild, well worth your time. But I haven't read it. I know there's a lot of studies on it, and I'm hoping that I can read some of them after I get through it. But I can't read scholarly writing on this stuff until I finish the book. So this will be one that I dive into hopefully soon. Again, I'm here for 2 more weeks. I don't have all that much time to dive into to these books and give them like the attention they deserve, but it is of hope to get through these in the near future. Okay, I have Frank Herbert's Dune. I got this at the airport because I was bored. I wanted something to read. I had never read Dune. Dune, it's great. I mean, there's not a lot to say, not a lot for me to say about it. I think it's a really fascinating novel. It's good, not great, but I like Frank Herbert. I think it's it's a good pickup. Read at the airport. Okay, what's next? That was sitting on top of my other Oxford World Classics. So I now have The Divine Comedy by Dante. This is one of those classic Western literature books that everyone pretty much reads at some point in their life. I have not finished it, gotten through some sections, but I was morbidly interested in Dante when I was researching Paradise Lost and Milton. So I wish I had more to say about this. But I'm planning on again spending more time to this when I get the chance that I have not quite had at this moment in time. So that one will get finished hopefully soon. Now this is one that I have read. This is one that I actually am quite influenced by myself. This is St. Augustine, Confessions. This is one of, again, the great works in the Western literature sort of theological study of Western culture. It is fascinating to read. St. Augustine, I think, is one of the greatest thinkers the world has ever known. I'm so glad I picked this up. This has influenced me in a lot of ways, inspired me in a lot of ways. I think it relates to John Milton. It relates to a lot of books that come after it. It's very ahead of its time in many ways. Right? And it also just reads really great. If you have the chance, there are some amazing quotes in here. There's some amazing passages in here. Read St. Augustine's Confessions. I would highly suggest, religious or not, this is one of those integral works. If you want to understand the history of specifically Western literature. I know that, not everything is inspired by these great Western books, but I live in the West. I live in America, so I have a fascination with these kind of studies. Then I have Percy Shelley's major works. Yeah, man. This is Mary Shelley's husband. I have read Queen Mab. I love his poetry. I'm so ready to read Prometheus Unbound, but I have not yet. But yeah, Percy Shelley, man. This is one that I'm excited to dive into. And this was sort of in the collection of the Romantic poets when I was interested in them. I got all of them. So I got Coleridge. I don't have Byron or Blake, but I have Coleridge, the major works, and this one has Kubla Khan, Raman the Ancient Mariner. Yeah, these are ones that I have not read all of this yet, but I took a class on British literature. We read the Romantic poets. This is one of the guys that I quite liked. Not as much as Shelley. Shelley was my favorite. I mean, one of my favorite poems of all time is by Percy Shelley. So, yeah, I can't think of it right now. My mind went blank, but you probably know what I'm talking about. Then I have Wordsworth, complete works. So this is lyrical ballads. The Prelude is the big one, and again, I haven't read the big one. I want to get Byron soon. I know I'm missing. Oh, Keats. Keats is also one of my favorites. I don't have any Keats in here, but I'm hoping to get some Keats in the near future. So, yeah, gotta fix these now, put them back in their spots they were in before I move on to the next little subsection. My library. That's all for the Oxford Classics. Great editions. I highly recommend them. Some of my favorite editions in the publishing industry. This is one I read about a year and a half ago. Or no, actually, it's been almost 2 years. This is Beowulf, the Seamus Heaney translation. I like Beowulf. I don't really have that much to say about it. It's not one that I think about all the time. I'm more fascinated by Chaucer and Gawain and the Green Knight. But Beowulf's kind of one that you have to read. I like it. I don't love it. That's about what I have to say about it. But I'm sure there's probably stuff in it that I am missing that some people have, appreciated more than I, have the luxury to. So, this is like not fitting in. Oh no, it is. Okay, that's on me. That's on me. Okay, next I have one of my favorite novels of all time, probably in the top 10, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This video is already 33 minutes, and I probably don't want to hit the hour mark. But if I were to talk about any book in this collection, the rest of this collection, for a period of time, it would probably be this one. My favorite part of this book is when Frankenstein finds the Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe, and he finds Paradise Lost, and he finds one of the Greek authors, and I can't remember who, because I never had any interest in that one as much as the other two. But Goethe is one of my favorite writers, and Milton is one of my favorite writers, and the sort of musing of these authors into Frankenstein's monster is so fascinating. The Moments of the Sublime is incredible. This is a book that has been adapted to and back, but the one thing that the adaptations lack is the sort of depth that this book spends with nature and with philosophy, and they always go for the science part. And yes, the science part is obviously integral to the book. It is about creation, but it is so rich with like things that you have heard in other books and have seen in the prior years of literature, and it does it in such a new and refreshing way. This is, in a sense, the great novel of the 1800s with Moby Dick, and it is quite fascinating. Mary Shelley, for her to do this at such a young age, is pretty ridiculous, and this is one of the greatest novels ever written. I have its brother too, that I will be talking about, because it's also one of my favorite novels. But next I have Robert Louis Stevenson, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Tales of Terror. This is a good one. I read this one in 7th grade or 8th grade, and I liked it. It is not one of my favorites, but it is of course integral to like the Gothic studies and whatnot. Worth your time. Pick it up, read it. You probably already read it if you went to middle school. So that's about what I have to say. Then I have D.H. Lawrence, Woman in Love. This is one that I have not read. I am really interested in reading The Rainbow. And this is a continuation of The Rainbow, so I have to pick up The Rainbow before I read this. But I got this for like $3. I mean, it was at a local bookstore. So I will read this after I read The Rainbow. Okay, we got a big one. A very big one. Paradise Lost, the John Milton. This is one I don't even remember where I got this from. I think I picked this up from the school library, but it's like so beat up. This is one of the greatest things I've ever read in my life, probably in the top 5. Fascinating abridgment of philosophy, theology. This is pretty much what I would say the turning point into modernity. It sort of abridges the theological and sort of philosophical thinking of the pre-Renaissance era with the future in the sublime. This is, Edmund Burke references this as his definition of the sublime is closely related to a moment in this of Satan and sort of like the big and grand feeling of something being terrifying, but that's in the sublime sense. The terrifying is sort of different for the Romantic poets. But this is fascinating. I mean, Foucault. I've already said Foucault, Freud, Kant. All of these guys. Milton is sort of even in a sense as influential as Shakespeare. And if you have not read it, do yourself a favor. It is a little bit dense. I mean, it is poetry and it is hard poetry. But it is well worth your time, and I would probably spend a lot of time with it if I had the chance. Yeah, it's it's really quite fascinating, some of the stuff that happens. Like Adam's like lamentations are insane. This is one I got like years ago. I don't really care that much about Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. It is not important to me. It is on the shelf, but I really don't care that much about it. It was okay. It's a fine book. It's nothing special. It does what it does, and it's cool with what it does. This is one that I'm actually quite fascinated by. This is called The Lost Estate by Alain Fournier. He's a French author. This is the only book he wrote. He goes to war after this. And this is pretty awesome. This is sort of magical realism. The guy falls in love with the girl, but like the girl lives in like the forest in this like crazy, it's been a few years, but she lives in like the forest in this like crazy like fairyland, and it's a fun one. It's not very hard to read. You'll get through it in like maybe a few days, and it's a good one. I like it a lot. I would recommend it. This is one that I actually honestly I picked up, but I honestly have like no clue anything about this. This is called Nana by Emile Zola, and I will read this eventually. But I also like cannot talk about it because I know absolutely nothing. Oh, now we got a big one. Big author entering the conversation. James Joyce, Dubliners. These are short stories. This is the James Joyce before like the crazy James Joyce. So you'll read this, and it reads like James Joyce. But then you'll read bits and pieces of his other stuff, and you'll be like, how did James Joyce write Dubliners? And also write one that I have on my shelf, a few books over. I don't sort these like alphabetically. I did it first, but then I moved them all to my apartment in Arizona, and it got all messed up, and I just never changed it. Next I have Gulliver's Travels. I'm not even going to show it because I have nothing to say about it. It is not a favorite, and I honestly can't even say I like it. So, now, this is a big one. This is the other Milton. This is the complete poems. So this also has Paradise Lost, but this has everything. This is Comus, Samson Agonistes, all of his poems. And I will say, with everything in me, Comus is amazing. One of my favorites from Milton, probably number 2 to Paradise Lost. The poems are great, don't get it twisted, but Comus is ridiculous. It is so fascinating. It reads like the Bible, and it is so bizarre that it does. It is such a weird and fascinating piece. I've read, some of the other stuff. We did not, in my Milton class, we did not read Paradise Regained. We read Simpson Agonistus. We read selected poems. We read Paradise Lost, and then we read Comus. And if I'm not mistaken, those are the big ones that we read in that class. But yeah, again, Milton, one of my favorite authors. If I wasn't interested so much in 19th century, 20th century American literature, I probably would have been a Renaissance type of guy for, my area of interest for graduate school. But I just love Poe and Melville too much. We have another really huge one. Oh man, this is like the big one. That is Ulysses by James Joyce. I have skimmed this. I have read it in the sense that I have read the words in it. This is a difficult book. I have heard that Finnegan's Wake is even more challenging. This is a book I will probably be reading for the next 10 years and trying to figure out everything about it. But for now, all I can say is I skimmed it. This is a adaptation of the Odyssey, but very loosely. It is the Odyssey, but it takes place over one day in Dublin. So, yeah, you know what? I wish I had more to say about it. I will get back to you. Hopefully we'll make a book about this. A lot of these authors and books I do want to make videos about individually so that I could attend and give more attention to these books on their own. There's only so much you can say in a shelf video when you're trying to get through I think I have like 50 books in here. I'm not going to reference most of the next. Some of these are just like obsolete, like I just don't care about them. I don't have anything to say about them. I'm not going to show them to you because it just doesn't matter. But this is Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, one of the first novels ever written. Yeah, this is one that I have been planning on reading for a while, and I will eventually get to. This is probably pretty good. So yeah, I'll hopefully get around to it here in the near future. I say that about a lot of these, and I probably will not get around to a lot of them in the near future. If I end up, if all goes well with grad school, I will probably have to read a lot of these books anyways. So, next one I have is a favorite, again, one of the personal favorites. It's Bram Stoker's Dracula, one of the masterpieces of the Gothic genre. This is beautiful. There are some passages in here that when I read the first time, I was like so amazed by Stoker's writing that I was like basking in it for a while. Like I like could not praise the writing enough. And yeah, I will still say this is one of the most beautiful reading books in the genre. And I learned a fact the other day that Stoker had met Theodore Roosevelt. And a lot of people don't know there's a cowboy in this book. And that there was some like theorizing that maybe Stoker had based the cowboy in this book off of Theodore Roosevelt and his encounter with Theodore Roosevelt. But no doubt, well worth your time. One of the great novels, probably in my top 10 or top 5. Yeah, pretty much. We have another big one here. There was a little moment in time where I was collecting pretty much all these like big books that people were like defining as like the greatest piece of literature ever. And one of those was Swann's Way by Marcel Proust. I have not read this. Again, this is one that I want to get to, but I have not read a lot of. I've not read a lot of French, German, that type of stuff. That's kind of like where I want to go to, but I've been so interested in the Americans that it is something that has just slipped my mind. But I do want to read Swann's Way. The paper's a little weird in this. There's like ridges in it, but this is definitely one that I will find myself coming to in the near future. So, yeah, looks like I have 2 more books on the shelf. that's it. Yeah, that's it. So these two are the Tolstoys. I have, hold on. The two Tolstoys that I have are two big ones. I have Anna Karenina. Again, I have not read this because, again, I have not had a lot of time to attend to other countries. But this is huge. This is one of the biggest books I have in my collection, and somehow the next one is even bigger. But Anna Karenina is obviously one of the great pieces in the Russian canon. And hopefully I get around to it soon. And then I have the other huge book that Tolstoy wrote and outdid himself, War and Peace. This thing is huge. This thing is basically the size of my head. I will get around to this eventually. Like I say with most of these books, this is 1,000 pages, and easily 1,000 pages. This is ridiculous. I will get around to these books probably way later than sooner. But no, I have not read Anna Karenina. I have read bits and pieces of War and Peace out of interest, but honestly, when I think about it, it doesn't even feel like I read those pieces because I absolutely have like no remembrance of anything that happens in these books. I feel like some of the stuff that I read a few years back, I didn't read well enough, and reading something once is good, but I think to fully gain an understanding of a book, you have to read it a few times, or at least devote your attention to it. One thing I will say is that I read Frankenstein before I went to college, and the 2 times that I've read it while in college, I have gotten a lot out of those readings. Some of these books that I have not read in college, like Lolita, I've never had to read it. I think I will have to read it. I'm taking a class this semester where I might have to read it. That would be pretty awesome. I'm interested in talking about it with my professors, my fellow students and whatnot. But a lot of this stuff I gained a lot of clarity on in classes, especially Milton. I took a Shakespeare class, was very helpful, but I feel like starting last fall semester, I started to really sort of gain an appreciation for the great Western classics, in a sense of like curiosity and wanting to understand how they influenced our society and sort of the ways we live. So those are the books I have. Obviously, I have not the biggest collection yet. I'm hoping to get more very soon. I love books. I love reading. I think reading is so well worth your time. If you have not picked it up as a hobby, I cannot recommend it enough. It is so very good for you and for if you have any intellectual curiosity, this will highly benefit you. So, yeah, more books to come. This is the first one. Wanted to introduce you my shelf. I feel like these books sort of represent the vast range of things that I'm interested in. So, yeah, that's what I got for you. I have a edition of Jane Eyre up there that I just don't want to grab. Jane Eyre is pretty good. I like it. There's another book up here that I have like absolutely no clue what it is, and I'm like trying to figure out what this is, and I like cannot for the life of me figure. Oh, okay. Oh, this is a book I got for class a few years ago. It's about the English Restoration. But for me, it's pretty much it. That's all I have for you guys. Hopefully the next video comes out sometime in the near future. I want to talk about Poe, like a full video on Poe and sort of the things that I've picked up and like interesting passages and things that I find curious about him. But this is all I have for you today. Hopefully you appreciate the bookshelf. That's it. I have a bunch of movies too. But that's all I got. So thank you very much. If you tune in for the first time, this is my first video, so it would have to be your first time. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to get back to you soon.